Hello and welcome to the Football Digest show. We'll be joining you every week to give you the lowdown on the weekend's previews, a look back upon what's happened in the last 7 days, and perhaps talk over all the footballing gossip, talking points and bones of contention. There's always plenty, isn't there, to mull over with myself, John Cross from the Daily Mirror, Andy Dunn, Chief Sports Writer at the Daily Mirror, Jeremy Cross, Chief Sports Writer of the Daily Star, and Matt Dunn, Football Supremo at the Daily Express. So guys, I'll tell you what's really caught my eye this week was just watching Monday night. And quite apart from the fact I thought that Liverpool hit incredible heights in their performance levels. I mean, you know, Jurgen Klopp, you could understand why he was a bit on the defensive over Roy Keane afterwards. But it just struck me, and I don't know what you think, is that basically last season we all thought that can never happen again. They can't win it by I don't know, Christmas. Surely not ever again. But actually, the gap between Liverpool and the rest struck me as being almost bigger than ever, and a really sort of ominous, worrying sign for the rest of the Premier League. Did you see it like that, Andy? Starting with you.
Absolutely, I did, and I saw it at the start of the season, John. I'm not being a smart aleck here, but I wrote a piece saying about how I just could not fathom how bookmakers had Manchester City as Premier League favourites for this season before a ball had been kicked. You know, on what evidence they based that on, I could not simply understand. Liverpool were miles better than anyone else last season. They've improved in terms of the additions to their squad, while City haven't. Really, you know, they've lost players like Leroy Sané and David Silva. I just could not see how Liverpool weren't overwhelming favourites before a ball was kicked. And now what we've seen, the limited amount of time we've seen, is nothing at all to suggest that they won't be dominant in this league again. For one thing, John, they're not only, you know, the best team there in their methods, in their technique, but it strikes me, I haven't watched this, again, limited amount of football, they just look physically so superior to everyone else. You know, the work rate and the athleticism and the non-stop commitment of, well, their two fullbacks, to name but two, of that team, is astonishing. It is astonishing. Their pressing is incredible. They are relentless. And I think we saw that. I would say I think they were quite lucky to have the 11 men on the pitch after Sadio Mane's challenge, should we call it, on Kieran Tierney. But let's face it, probably the 10 men they would have won. That, I think you're right, that was eye-catching. That was a performance. That and Chelsea away, you know, maybe a pipe opener against Leeds to sort of, you know, blow away a few cobwebs. And then Chelsea away, Arsenal at home, two emphatic performances. And yes, I think they're long odds on to retain the title.
Jeremy, do you see the margin, you know, ending up at the end of the season as big and perhaps even as embarrassing as we just saw at the finish of last season?
Yeah, I do. You know, we were all sort of taken aback last season by the distance Liverpool put between themselves and City and Chelsea and the rest. And you thought, well, that's a one-off, you know, that won't happen again. But, you know, after seeing 3 games of Liverpool this season, you think, well, who's going to stop them? How many games are they going to lose? Realistically, are they going to lose more than 2-3 games? I just can't see it. They've got so much strength in depth. You know, they just brush aside teams with so much ease. I know Arsenal are a work in progress, but there was a stark difference between the standards of them and Liverpool on Monday night. Liverpool had 61 shots at goal in 3 Premier League games this season. That's 17 more than the nearest team. So, you know, they are going to score loads of goals. They've got a great defence. The fullbacks give such an attacking dimension to that team. No one has worked out yet how to stop them. And from early evidence, you know, City are limping through. United have already lost a game. They've won at Chelsea, which is, you know, one of the games which you think in a season they may drop some points. So they're cruising, really. And I just can't... Yeah, it could be 18 points again. It could be more.
Yeah. Matt, they've made a couple of signings, Liverpool, haven't they, in Jota and obviously Thiago. I mean, from a standpoint where they probably weren't going to do too much business, that looks to have not, you know, pushed them on another couple of notches, doesn't it, I think?
Yeah, but it's not so much how much further Liverpool have gone up. I think Guardiola made a rod for his own back 3 years ago when he set the benchmark for how many points you need to win the modern Premier League, which is going to be, give or take, 100 points, there or thereabouts. Liverpool are just going to do that again, and they've shown every sign that they're going to do that. What's the problem for the Premier League, and it being a competitive race, is that Manchester City show no signs of getting anywhere near that mark. Manchester United aren't quite there to be able to sustain something like that all over a season. And yeah, it does look like Liverpool are just going to do what they did last year, say to the rest, come and catch us, and no one's going to respond.
Yeah. Andy, looking at it, I mean, we've got to analyse, haven't we, these sort of kind of chasing pack, I guess. And, I think we all kind of, maybe one team out who we think would finish top four, really, and sort of varying degrees over whether Chelsea would or not. Andy, you're not quite sold on the Frank Lampard vision of future success and glory at Stamford Bridge, are you? And no. Probably what you saw at West Brom last week, and then also losing on penalties in midweek at Tottenham. Are all the old problems still there for Frank Lampard? Has he actually solved it this summer?
Yeah, the problems are still there. That's an understatement. I think I was certainly felt a little bit isolated in not viewing Frank Lampard's first season at Chelsea as the resounding success that many of my colleagues did. I thought it was okay, but the glaring problem was that he conceded 54 Premier League goals. I think you had to go down to 11th place to find someone who conceded that amount of goals. I think Crystal Palace finished 14th and conceded fewer than Chelsea did. So it was obvious where the problem was, And no, it hasn't been solved. That game on Saturday, listen, you can't legislate for the type of individual errors, first from Marcus Alonso, and then, of course, that glaring one from Thiago Silva. But take that third goal at West Brom, and that was symptomatic that all that is wrong with Chelsea's defending. It was poor organisation. I think Reece James played, 3 of them on side. It was poor organisation. It looked like players who didn't really know what they were supposed to be doing in defending that set piece. And that's where the goal comes from. And that is a fundamental problem. A defensive organisation throughout the team has to come from the coaches, has to come from the manager. And there's no sign. You do not, concede 3 goals in 27 minutes to West Brom if you are a title contender. Probably in the same way, John, that you don't concede 5 at home to Leicester if you are, if you've got serious pretenses to win the title. So that's why Chelsea will struggle again this season. I don't see at the moment the Frank has any particular idea of how to solve these defensive deficiencies, and that is what will undo them. Defensive deficiencies is what will undo Manchester City, and defensive deficiencies are okay. They conceded 3 against Leeds, but generally not what Liverpool are about.
Jeremy, do you see it as a personnel issue for Chelsea, or do you see it as a structure issue for Frank Lampard, which, let's be honest, he seems to struggle to sort of solve as good as they are going forward?
I think so, yeah. Look, Lampard was a fantastic player. His game was built on being an attacking midfielder. He's signed a lot of exciting players this summer. They are heavy loaded with goal threats from all angles, but their Achilles heel remains the defence. Now, what does Lampard know about defending? I don't know. Not a lot, I would imagine, because, while he played at the highest level, defending was not his speciality. So you have to wonder if he has mastered the art of, forming a back 4 or a back 5 or whatever, whichever system he plays, that is capable of keeping clean sheets. And that's not been the case so far. So, Andy's right. This is not a problem that has just arisen in the last few months. Chelsea's defence has not been good enough for several seasons, in my opinion. And look, Thiago Silva, we all know, has been a wonderful player. And look, he made a really bad mistake at West Brom. And, it's going to take him a while to settle in. But if Lampard thinks that one player can solve all his problems, then he's probably been a bit naive.
Sure. Matt, one of the Chelsea targets throughout the summer, which they haven't landed yet, you never know, there's a few days to go yet, is Declan Rice. Do you see that? Do you see the sense in that, potential signing if they could get it done? I mean, the odds are stacked against surely now, but do you understand the logic behind the pursuit, if you like?
To be honest, I don't think it's an area where Chelsea are particularly lacking. I mean, when Kante played in that position, they won the title. They've got other players in there, defensive midfielders who can hold a team together. It's like we say, I think the problem's in his back 4. And I was there for the Chelsea Barnsley game when Thiago Silva made his debut, and that's supposed to be the acid test, isn't it? Can you do it on a wet Wednesday night against Barnsley? And they could, mainly because he stood 5 yards off the pace, watched the game develop in front of him, stepped in when he needed to, did a bit of jostling and organising, and wasn't put under a great deal of pressure. But the trouble is, as soon as he gets to the cut and thrust of the Premier League, he hasn't got that luxury. And I think Frank Lampard's put a lot of stall on Thiago Silva coming in and doing his back four for him. He's spoken so highly about his leadership qualities, even without the language, that I think he's hoping that that's some sort of a magic wand to cure that problem. And I think that's how their season will sink or swim on, whether that's true or not.
Andy, do you think he's going to stick now with Mendy? Does he need to stick with Mendy in goal?
I think he will stick with him. Listen, you brought in a keeper for £22 million or something like that. I remember Mendy being linked with Aston Villa? No, West Ham. I think he was linked with West Ham a couple of seasons ago when Pellegrini was there. And we talk about a fee of £2 million at that point. He's clearly improved. I don't know enough about Mendy to say, is he going to be, a great keeper for Chelsea? I hope so. I think he has to stick with him now. Yeah, there's no point. Chopping and changing doesn't do anyone any good, does it? I mean, he brought Caballero in for the game that I was at on Saturday, and the first three things Caballero had to do was pick the ball out the net 3 times. I mean, that was literally it. The first thing that happened was that Robinson hit a shot past him. He wasn't at fault for any of the goals, but the mistakes in front of him, you just wonder if, maybe with a better understanding between keeper and defence, if maybe they don't happen. And of course, you only got that understanding if you have got a keeper who's there game in, game out. You decide on one keeper. If he makes the odd mistake, you stay with him. And I think probably now he will give Mendy the run and let him establish himself as the number one.
He did make a absolutely super save midweek, didn't he? Which really caught the eye. I was just going to move it on to the Champions League, Jeremy, and I was looking at the, trying to work out who, which pot would go where and who could get who, and what the sort of formula would be for the Premier League teams. Liverpool in pot 1, isn't it? And the rest are basically the other 3 in pot 2. What really caught my eye was amongst the betting odds. Really, is Bayern Munich are clear favourites with most of the bookies, but they're sticking out like a sore thumb. Is Man City as second favourites? I mean, bearing in mind, their sort of kind of previous history in this competition, taking nothing away from the incredible players they've got in the squad, I found that really strange, don't you?
Yeah, well, they were favourites to win it last season as well, all through the competition, and I never had much faith in them winning it. I mean, look, on paper, are they capable of winning it? Of course they are. They've got some wonderful players. I know Andy referred to the fact that they've lost a couple of great players last season with Silva and Sané, but they've still got a squad that is the envy of most teams in Europe. But they continue to come up short. Now, I presume that they are second favourites because they've got Guardiola as manager. But, this will be now 10 years since Guardiola last won the Champions League, which was, at Wembley, when that great Barcelona team gave Man U the run around that night. So that's a long time for a manager of his standing and calibre to not win. I mean, the elite competition at club level. I know Guardiola bangs on about the Premier League's the one he wants more than most, but I don't buy into that at all. I think the great managers in the game will always be judged by how many European Cups they manage to win. And it's obviously it's a very tough tournament to win. We all know that. But they seem to have a mental block. They shouldn't have lost to Lyon, who were mediocre. I'm not saying they would have gone on to win it. I think Bayern Munich looked pretty unstoppable last season, and they will do again this year. I think they'll win it again. Bayern Munich looks such a well-oiled machine. But yeah, look, the competition has become Guardiola's nemesis. It's become a bit embarrassing, really, and he's not got past the quarter-final stage, which is woefully short of the expectations that came with him when he came to Manchester in 2016.
Matt, they've done obviously some business, haven't they, at the City? I mean, is that enough? I mean, they're still looking for a left back, I think, aren't they? Is creativity an issue? Is there sort of a forward an issue with Aguero? struggling through injuries. Do they, have they got enough at centre half position? Do you think they've done enough business to really be, sort of in and amongst the major trophies this season?
I just don't think the fear factor's there anymore. That's the problem. They haven't got those names that you see in the lineup and think, wow, we've got to try and stop him today. The one exception to that is Raheem Sterling, who is a world-class player. But if you look at the rest of them, they're not like they were when they came in and blitzed the league the first time. The sort of names, Aguero at his peak, two Silvers, both, they were a team that you went out and thought, Company holding the whole thing together at the back. De Bruyne, obviously, is another great player. But there's too many gaps in there that are just making up the numbers. And yet, they need to spend so widely that there isn't a transfer option just to solve it, because they need to improve across the board, I think. And that's what's happened, is I think the whole thing's gone a little bit stale, and other people have improved and they've actually just dropped off a little bit. And you only turn that around by refreshing 3 or 4 players a season, and that hasn't been happening for long enough.
Do you think they need to refresh the manager, Andy? I mean, or does the manager need a refresh? If you see what I mean,
Yeah, No, I don't. No, I don't. I still think the Premier League is extremely fortunate to have Pep Guardiola in division. Listen, I would slightly disagree with what Matt's just said. In it, I think they have got enough, and maybe for the past 2 seasons, the fact that they've got goals from all departments essentially, particularly across the midfield, has camouflaged the fact that they maybe have been an out-and-out striker light. He's had 2 strikers, Jesus and Aguero, and Aguero's had some issues, and Jesus, of course, was injured for the last game. They didn't have an out-and-out striker, against Leicester City. Raheem Sterling, was filling that void. So I do think that might be an issue. But I still think that they are playing a brand of football that I think is the best in the Premier League. Liverpool fans might argue Liverpool are certainly a more effective team, a more dynamic team, more professional maybe. But I still would say the Manchester City play the best brand of football. They are the most watchable team in the Premier League. And I think that counts for something. I really do. And yes, it would be great if he could win this or win that. But I think it counts for something that they are producing a brand of football that is just a pleasure to watch. Does areas need addressing? Quite clearly, the left-back areas need addressing, for goodness knows how long. Yes, maybe. But I just think that his obsession with attacking, his obsession, he talks about it being such an achievement to get 100 goals in a season. And that sort of gives you an idea of why they're also conceding goals. It's because, we've long known that is the problem. And they won't not win the league because they're not good enough going forward. They will not win the league because they're not good enough defending. It's simple as that. And Leicester had this template that will be adopted by so many teams. That was a bizarre game on Sunday. Leicester City are 1-0 down, and they've still got every man behind the ball sitting so deep. As Rodri said, in that slightly bizarre interview, that he thought they were unlucky to lose 5-2. And that football wasn't the winner. But in a way, you could almost see his point. It's not unusual. You're thinking the game's 1-0, and Leicester are just dropping so deep and just waiting and trying Manchester City's patience until it went, and they capitalised on the mistakes. Not everyone will come away 5-2 winners, but that will be the template that other teams will use.
You're being remarkably generous to Rodri there, but I take your other points. I do still think they're an amazing watch. Wonderful.
Yes, I do.
Wonderful entertainment. Easy on the eye. Beautiful team to watch. But I tell you, what has been fascinating to watch this week, Jeremy, is the fallout at Manchester United. Very simple question. What on earth is going on at Old Trafford? In particular, the transfer business or lack of it.
Yeah, it's bizarre. I mean, United, I think a few seasons ago, Ed Woodward, the chief executive, got his reputation burned a little bit over the Fabregas issue. They made it clear they wanted to sign him. They had a couple of dibs at it, and they got rings rung round them by Barcelona, basically. The deal didn't happen, and they were left with egg on the face. And there's almost like a repeat of that now with Sancho, because they've been, we've all been writing stories about Sancho for weeks, months even. And we're now in the last week of the window. We've put a bid in, it's been rejected. it looks like Borussia Dortmund are going to hold firm and say, you're not giving us what we need. So I find it bizarre how a club of that wealth, Manchester United, a cash cow, one of the biggest in world football, will not just go and pay what Borussia Dortmund want for a player who could have 10 years at Old Trafford. He could become the most sensational player of his generation. And if it costs them 110 million quid, so what? That's peanuts. It's short change to Man United. I get that it looks bad in the current climate, but, other clubs are ploughing through money on players and United are not. And that, if I was a supporter of Man United, I'd be scratching my head thinking, what is going on here? I mean, United used to be the club that could attract any player they wanted because of the size of their reputation and history, and they don't seem to have that anymore. I'm not saying Sancho doesn't want to go to United. I'm sure he does, but these are the deals that United should be getting over the line, and it should have been done weeks ago. They'll be scrambling around in the market next week, just trying to sign over the weekend, trying to sign someone, just trying to appease the fans, and it's just a bad look.
Yeah, I have to say, I sometimes have sympathy with clubs when they try and sign players and stuff like that. But just following on that, I'll just ask you on this one. Basically, everyone's known Sancho's price, from very early on. We all know, obviously, how transfer deals work, and there's a bit of bluff always in the transfer business. But I do think if you look at Dortmund's history, when they stick a valuation on a player, they stick to it. And they've been absolutely forceful from day one. Penniless, we're not doing it. And sure enough, United are now sort of kind of hoping to play a sort of a late game and then basically leave themselves in a situation where they're probably, putting a lower bid, they're going to miss out. So do they look elsewhere? And that's where the panic element comes in. That's where I think it looks really bad for United, because they don't have to pay that. So they should have walked away a month ago and then looked elsewhere. But, now do they go for Dembele? Now is it embarrassing because of that bad planning, if you like? That's where it gets me.
Well, if you think back to that time with Fabregas, that window, they ended up buying Marouane Fellaini from Everton for the thick end of 30 million quid. And he was literally signed hours before the window closed. And it was just left fans going, we were supposed to be getting Fabregas. And with respect to Fellaini, we've got Fellaini. I mean, he turned out to be a half-decent player for United, but he's no Cesc Fabregas, let's be honest. And I just think that whoever the player is that comes in there, and he's on a hiding to nothing then, because the fans think, well, you're an afterthought almost, a panic buy. It makes it even more difficult for that player to make an impact because he's under pressure then. And he's not the player that the fans want. So I just find it odd that...
Is Dembele a no-go?
Well, I think the issue with Dembele is that United want to sign him on a season-long loan, and Barcelona are happy to do that, but they want part of the deal is structured that United have to buy him next summer on a permanent deal, and I'm not sure next summer United would be in a position to want him. I mean, look, if he scores 30 goals, then it's great, but if he doesn't work out and they're lumbered with having to sign him, and he won't come cheap, then... So I'm not sure that's going to happen. I mean... Cavani's available, clearly wants out. Why don't they make a bid for Cavani? I
agree. Matt, what's interested me this week is obviously Gary Neville. Clear frustration on Twitter. When was it? On Wednesday morning, basically declaring civil war. I mean, what fascinates me about this is that basically Solskjaer's coming up for 2 years in the job. It's difficult to talk about this, I guess, the morning after sort of Man United have won 3-0 at Brighton in the League Cup. But I think we all can see that basically deficiencies and, argue and debate whether there'll be title challenges this season. So why, tell me, are all the pundits, 2 years into the reign, 2 years into Jose Mourinho's reign, when he'd actually won trophies, it was all about Jose Mourinho. Now, 2 years into Solskjaer's reign, it's all about Manchester United. There's a subtle difference there. I think you know where I'm coming from, really. Kind of dissect that one for us, really. Does Solskjaer get a little bit of an easy ride on this front?
Oh, of course he does, but that's what he earned from being a successful player for them. And everyone knows that's why you go and manage your own club, because you do get that head start, the Frank Lampard syndrome, as Andy'd probably call it. He is. But to be fair, I thought he was a really bad appointment to start with. But I've kind of grown to see with them that I don't think he is the problem at the club. I think it is above him. You look at the signings he's made, they've not been that bad. And that's one of the key jobs of a manager, is to get the recruitment right. And he signed players like Bruno Fernandes, Harry Maguire. Of the 7 centre-backs at the club, he's the one who's half decent. And others, other managers have signed the stuff that they can't get rid of at the minute. I think that he's bound to have support from his old mates in the dressing room. And fair play, you have to see through those, red-tinted spectacles whenever you read any assessment from them. But I do genuinely think that the problem is Manchester United. I said to Jadon Sancho a couple of weeks ago on this programme that was the big signing of the summer that had to get done for Manchester United to be treated really, properly again, and to consider themselves a big club again. And they've made an absolute horlicks of it. And that's got to be a boardroom problem. You can't expect to come in and manage as a series of people, good managers at the time, Louis van Gaal, Jose Mourinho. They've struggled to fill the void since Fergie because of what's gone on upstairs. And they're no longer the big club that they think they are.
Andy, we always used to talk about the former Liverpool player pundits. Well, Jose Mourinho did in particular, basically, how they perhaps getting easy riders, too many of them. And, have we got that unfair balance now perhaps in a Man United direction? And are they being, should we say, fair or otherwise towards Solskjaer, really? Are they being objective is the word I'm looking for?
Yeah, well, I think they are. I think if come, let's face it, we're 3 games, some clubs have only played 2 in the Premier League so far. So I do think, a pundit does not have to make a judgment yet. I think what will happen, I think Solskjaer, I don't think he gets a particularly easy ride. I think people will wait until we see how this United team's challenge this season develops. If after a dozen games, they're shy of the top 4 and they're a considerable distance behind Liverpool, then I think he will come under scrutiny. I don't see that there's any. I don't think he gets an easy ride from pundits. I think Gary Neville's got a point when he identifies the issue of recruitment. But I don't think it's particularly to protect Solskjaer. So the answer is no. I think we are entitled to wait for a reasonable amount of time, a dozen games, and then see where United are then. In terms of Sancho, I get where you're all coming from on that, but the fact of the matter is, if United think that's too big a price, then they're entitled to say that we're not paying that price. And that is, the idea that you just pay whatever Dortmund want, is I just don't think that's the way business should be conducted. Unfortunately for United, it's happened to them on more than one occasion. But I do think the idea that they should just pay up what Dortmund want, and I think if you make a judgment on this Sancho worth that, at times you think maybe, you look at him at other times and you think, no. So I understand that's part and parcel of how you go about your business.
Yeah, I think that's their prerogative to price or not. But where I think that it's slightly skewed is that basically, if you know your market well enough, you know your sort of kind of history. You say, well, they're not going to sell him. We'll have to look elsewhere, and they've left it to the last window. Last week of the window. That's the problem. What happens, Jeremy, if they don't do any business? What happens? Do they finish top 4? Do they win some silverware? Solskjaer was talking last night about doing better in the semi-finals this year. They'd lost 3 semis last year. But can they still, push on this season without making another major signing?
Yeah, look, I think making genuine progress is going to be tough without serious additions. But they finished the season strongly. They did well to finish 3rd, in my opinion. And there's no reason why they can't finish in the top 4 again. I mean, I think that's within their capabilities. Look, a lot will be dependent on the form of Fernandes. He's the jewel in the crown now. And the goals of Rashford and Martial. Martial's such a frustrating player, can be genial in one game and terrible the next. But, when you've got a happy Anthony Martial playing, then he's going to get you goals. The issue is obviously at the back. I mean, look, Maguire, I know we referred to Maguire earlier. He is the glue that holds that defence together, tries to hold that defence together. I've got a feeling that Lindelof will be dropped soon, and I think he might have a go with Eric Bailly alongside Maguire. But look, they can finish in the top four. I'm sure of that. But you know, is that enough for United? They should be challenging for the title. They've not won it since 2013. It's now 2020. You know, they should be thinking top one, not top four. And you know, teams have to keep progressing and keep. You can't stand still. It's just the Premier League doesn't allow teams time to do that. Look at Chelsea. Look at Liverpool. You know, they're continually signing players. And, you know, Andy's got a point. You know, why should United be held to ransom by Dortmund? They shouldn't. But that's the world we live in. It happened to Manchester United last summer when they signed Maguire for 80 million. They've said all along he's not worth that. We're not paying that. And look what happened. They paid 80 million for Harry Maguire, which I think is ridiculous amount of money for a centre back. But so they've ended up paying it, and that's the world that football operates in. So yeah, they can finish top four, but you know, and they'll probably say, well, that's a satisfactory season. But as the clock ticks on title challenges, you know, it's another season gone without, you know, even coming close to knocking Liverpool off the perch.
I think you raise a good point about Eric Bailly. He's got a presence, hasn't he, really, that Lindelof just hasn't got. And so at least give him a go, I think, anyway. But there you go. Listen, Matt, there's been a lot of talk this week, isn't there, about kind of the England squad. You know, just the obvious question is Southgate right to leave Foden and Greenwood out of the squad?
Yeah, I think he is, but he's right because it's his decision. In a weird way, of all the England managers that might have picked them, he's one of them. But he would have made a very personal decision on how he wants to run his own ship, and he would have thought it through, and he would have probably listened to some of the things that were written at the time, but also taken with them a great deal of his own thoughts and made a considered, objective decision. And that's what I think is important. You know, these are two players that hopefully in the future of the English game are going to be starring lights for years to come. They made a horrendous mistake. Let's not get that wrong. Let's not hide that fact. And age or lack of it is no excuse for that. You know, it was pure stupidity, selfishness, and everything else that sort of destroys a team harmony that they showed in Iceland. And Gareth Southgate will need to nip that in the bud. So, yeah, I think, his course of action is the right one. He will deal with that internally. He will speak to the squad about it, I'm sure. He'll talk to the players. And then hopefully, with the excitement of 3 games in a week, you know, that'll long be forgotten by November. And we can start building towards a successful Euro 2020 when it finally gets there.
Andy, on a similar vein, correct to call Harry Maguire?
Yes, I think it is. I think that Southgate's views on Maguire and believing Maguire's side of the story, it was clear he was always going to recall him. And if Southgate believes that Maguire has done no wrong, then I think he's got no option, really. And bear in mind, of course, that Maguire is in the process, which could be a very long process by all accounts. We seem to forget of an appeal against the convictions in Greece. So while that appeal is pending, I don't think you should be sentencing Maguire to a protracted period in the international wilderness. You know, his appeal could, by all accounts, you know, it could be a year, 2 years, 3 years. You know, what do you do? Not pick him at all while that's going ahead? I think Southgate is within his rights to pick him, and I'm not surprised at all that he's back in the fold.
Yeah, sure. Jeremy, I'll just go back to club football with you, if I may. Well, a couple of deals that really caught my eye, really. It's some of the business that Aston Villa are doing, basically. You know, Ross Barkley. I do think it's a quality player, and to sign him on loan, you know, on top of Martinez, on top of, you know, re-signing Jack Grealish, if you like, to a new contract. Villa are kicking on this season. And results prove it, don't they, I think?
Yeah, they've won two games. You know, that's, in the scheme of things, that's 6 valuable points come the end of the season. Look, I'm not saying they're going to be in the top half of the table all season, but if they can build up a bank of points between now and the turn of the year, they should stand them in good stead to stay up, which is ultimately their aim. I know they've probably got bigger ambitions that long term, but for the next couple of seasons, they need to just stabilise and stay in the Premier League. Obviously, keeping Grealish was a huge plus. We all know about his influence at the club. He's a great player. And Barkley, look, we know he can be a great player. He's shown flashes of brilliance at Chelsea. It's not quite worked out for him, but we do know there is a great player in there, and he'll get regular games at Villa. I don't know where he'll play in terms of with the Grealish thing. They're similar players in a lot of respects, but it's a big chance for Barkley to make an impact because it was a big move for him to Chelsea, leaving Liverpool where he was born, and it's not quite worked out for him. But we all know there's a great player in there. It's just, can he use his brain enough? I mean, I know you probably remember when ahead of the World Cup in Brazil, Hodgson was infuriated the way he used to give the ball away in dangerous positions. He's done that with Chelsea as well. So he needs to play with his brains as well as his feet.
Matt, I'm just looking at Fulham. Are they down already?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, undoubtedly. I listened in on their press conference, Scott Parker's press conference this week after the Tony Khan tweets, and there's fun. They'll get through it and they'll sort it out because they're both hearts are both in the right place. But it's just a sign of the disjoint that's there. The fact it hadn't been sorted by the time he stood in front of the press is a sign that things are going horribly wrong. They've got the same team basically that weren't good enough last time. Certainly the same defence. I can't see it going any other way, unfortunately. There's been nothing about them in these opening 3 games to suggest it's going to be any different. It was barring them signing Messi before Monday, I think that's going to be it for them.
Could you see him pushing to get out the new camp to swap it for Craven Cottage?
Well, it's just it's handy for the shopping, isn't it? Yeah,
listen, you raise a very good point about the Tony Khan thing. And, Tony Khan took to Twitter, and those that didn't sort of see it, basically saying, apologising for the performance, which obviously didn't please Scott Parker, and then also basically promising a centre half, which would then perhaps suggest that the centre halves at the club already are not good enough, again, riling Scott Parker. And in all honesty, I don't think his words went down particularly well with Fulham fans on social media. So trying to appease them backfired. And I actually think that row was a hell of a story. You've basically got kind of the head honcho at the club and the manager falling out after 3 games, and probably didn't even get the kind of headlines that it might have deserved. It's tucked away a little bit, wasn't it?
I did my best.
Well, no, I'm not. This is no sort of a criticism of your coverage, Matt. But it's amazing, isn't it? That story, that fallout so quickly, it already raises question marks, perhaps, about Scott Park, who's such a nice fellow. I'm sure we all want him to succeed, and did an amazing job to kind of get Fulham up last season. Do you think he'll see the season out like this?
I think if he doesn't, it'll be a mistake on Fulham's part. He clearly felt very confident in attacking the people who ultimately pay his wages and decide whether he has a job or not. He knows he's got the Fulham fans behind him still, and if they were to choose, like you say, it's never the owner's job to apologise for performances on the field. He talks to the manager, who then has to make any apologies that are necessary, and the fans did react against that. Whether he survives or not is ultimately down to Tony Khan, and that's up to him how he wants to deal with things. But I think it would be a mistake because he's showing all the signs of trying to get the best and do the right thing at a club where he's clearly under-resourced, and you're presumably preparing to try and get back again, because that's all the signs that they're showing in the transfer market at the moment.
Yeah, sure. Andy, I want to dedicate the last chunk of the show to kind of a real burning issue, not just in football but across sports, but obviously we're going to focus on the football. But it's really about the bailout and the financial aspects. I mean, the Daily Mirror, it has launched its Save Our Sports campaign. A lot of EFL clubs are facing financial ruin. They're pretty clear that they could go out of business. this debate over whether it should be the government who, let's be honest here, have kind of shut the gates, not let any fans out. So basically, really making it difficult for those clubs to survive. Should they bail them out, or should the Premier League clubs, who are spending hundreds of millions of pounds again against all the odds and expectation in this transfer window, is it their responsibility to help out the football pyramid, the football family?
Well, I mean, I'll come on to that. Just very briefly, though, in our next show, let's get started on Ross Barkley loan moves to Aston Villa and Premier League loan moves and everything that's wrong with him. That has a bee in my bonnet. The Ross Barkley move to Aston Villa it's just wrong, by the way. Loans between clubs is wrong, so I'll come on to that. Another thing, Tony Khan, quickly, anyone apologising for performances, it's a shocking thing to do. No team goes out to perform badly, so you don't need to apologise for anything, even if you're getting beaten at home by Aston Villa. Now, this question, it's a bit of a cop-out, but it strikes me that the responsibility to help out clubs further down the pyramid of football lies with a combination of the Premier League and the government. I think the government should be focusing on helping out those lower league clubs. It's such, as you will know, having spoken to many people in Premier League boardrooms, it is such a delicate, contentious issue. If you look, you look at, say, for example, the wage structures of clubs lower down the leagues, and how much they've spent on players, from their solidarity payments. Is it throwing, basically good money after bad? Is it? You look at them, and Paul Barber speaks very eloquently. They have to keep a roof over their own heads at this time. Now, certain clubs in the Premier League are better equipped to sustain, to survive, the financial meltdown that's coming. Clubs like Manchester City, for example, but maybe not Brighton. So then their first thought is for the 2,000 people employed by them, and not for clubs lower down the ladder. And also from a government's point of view, Brian Reeder wrote a very good column in the Daily Mirror this morning, saying, how the government like to get on footballs, like to hop aboard football's bandwagon when it suits them, and maybe it doesn't suit them now to bail them out. But if you're a government minister and you look at, you sit there and you look at, you look at agents taking £263 million out of the game per year. And that's showing no signs of slowing down during this particular transfer window. Goodness knows what Jorge Mendes has made out of this transfer window. He's probably done the Ruben Dias deal. They will look at that and they'll think, well, hang on a minute. Is this a good use of government money to put it into football when this amount of money is swirling around the game at the top level? And I understand why some ministers might think, well, it's up to them. If they can afford to pay agents' fees of £263 million, if they can afford to pay Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang $375,000 a week, well then why are we putting money into the game? Now I know it's lower down the game that they should be concentrating on. So the answer really is it has to be a combination of both. I understand why the Premier League, will want guarantees, regulation about any money they're going to give. But they have to come up with something, and they will come up with something. But I think it should be in conjunction with the government. It's time for them to work together and find out how best to do it. But it's such a deep-seated problem. I look at the wages for clubs from, say, last season or season before last, and you've got lower league clubs, with average wages of £6,000 a week for the player, and that's just not sustainable. And why should the Premier League pay those wages? Yeah. That's a difficult one.
Yeah, Jeremy, one of the most bizarre tweets I've seen was from the BBC's excellent reporter, Dan Rowan. But yesterday, I think he'd spoken to various people sort of down the football ladder, basically, and one had said that, the Man City's expenditure on their new centre-half could keep the League Two going for a whole year. And my immediate reaction was, well, why would Man City, need to keep the League Two going for a whole year? Surely that, their first interest is to try challenge for the title. It is a skewed argument in many ways. And I actually think that kind of tweet actually weakened the argument. It's a really difficult dilemma, isn't it?
It is. Look, Man City are one of the wealthiest clubs in the world. They will say, well, why should we have to give money to clubs they literally have nothing to do with? But then you look at a club like, say, for example, Burnley. I know Sean Dyche was quite outspoken on this issue last week. But if you look at a club like Burnley, they sign a lot of their players from lower league clubs. I mean, I checked on, I Googled it, and the last game Burnley played was at Southampton, and 7 of the starting 11 were all signed from League One, League Two clubs. So, you know, look, these clubs down the bottom end are feeder clubs, really, and for some other clubs higher up. I mean, I suppose the best example is Jamie Vardy. Look at Jamie Vardy. He came from non-league, played for Fleetwood. He's now played in a World Cup with England. He's won a title with Leicester. You know, my worry would be, and look, there is no easy solution to this, but if some of these clubs do go to the wall and the structure collapses beneath the top 2 divisions, a lot of these players won't get that chance anymore because those clubs won't exist. That'd be a real sad indictment of the game, I think.
Matt, just to finish with you, what's your view? Will it get done first and foremost? You know, will League One and League Two perhaps even have to consider going into hibernation? And you know, I mean, they've got their own problems with sort of kind of testing throughout the divisions, haven't they? That seems a burning issue. But fundamentally, will the Premier League, will the government bail out the EFL?
I'm not sure the government will. And in terms of will it get done, I'm not quite sure what the benefits of mothballing leagues are because they're still contractually obliged to pay their players, but then they won't have broadcasting revenue and they won't have advertising revenue or sponsorship revenue. So you can save a bit of money by shutting the stadiums down, but I don't really see how that makes economic sense. So that sort of talk, I'm not sure how much future is when push comes to shove. What I think, I don't see why the trouble is the Premier League. What happens in the doomsday scenario where Leagues 1 and 2 do lose a lot of clubs, the whole of football goes into meltdown, we restructure, the vacuum will be filled with feeder clubs, B teams, the same as they have in La Liga. The top Premier clubs will benefit because suddenly they'll have somewhere to stockpile all those loan signings that Andy doesn't like and play them and give them some competitive football in their B team, which will make the top clubs even stronger as they are in La Liga. To be honest, if football did go into meltdown, it would be an opportunity for the leading Premier clubs. And it is a competition after all. So to naively expect them to bail them out, you need to appeal to something bigger. And I think the whole of football needs to remember where it came from and what's unique about the game in this country, which is the fact that Hereford United can beat Newcastle in the FA Cup, that the smaller teams always have that path to glory, that teams can go in Wiggins can make it from the bottom to the top, that these sorts of success stories that we love in football are unique to this country. And if we want to cherish that and protect that, someone has to knock the Premier League heads together and say, look, put self-interest aside because we know this doesn't make any sense to you. But there is a wider picture here, whether it's led by the FA or the Premier League board. Somebody needs to say, look, if we value anything about the football in this country, we need to act now because it's not a huge amount of money for the game as a whole, but it would make a hell of a difference. And if we do want to preserve English football as it is, then that's what we've got to do. But let's not kid ourselves. If clubs go bust, football will go on. And that's the harsh world that we live in. It's just whether or not we want to keep football as it is with the romanticism that we've got with our greatest league in the world, which the Premier is built on that sort of competitive element. If that we want to preserve that, something needs to be done urgently. And I don't think with all that money swilling around the top of the game, the government has any appetite to get involved in that. So it's up to the Premier League now, and they need to act quickly.
Profound words. Very good note to end on, I think, really. So I do think football needs to act quickly and find a solution, doesn't it? And guys, thanks indeed for all your solutions this week. Really enjoyed the show. Thanks ever so much indeed. And we will see you back, same place, same time next week. Look forward to it, guys. Thanks a lot for your company.